Thank you for joining the Healthcare Equity Work Group for today's webinar, Bolstering the Workforce, Developing a Successful Pathway. This webinar is being recorded and evaluations for CME will be provided following the webinar. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Torres, who is a member of our Healthcare Equity Work Group. Thank you, Dr. Torres.
Thank you. It is an honor and a privilege to introduce Dr. Alyx Porter, who is our speaker today. Dr. Porter is a neuro-oncologist at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona, where she has been for nearly 2 decades and is an associate professor of neurology. Dr. Porter received her undergraduate education at Spelman College and went on to receive her medical degree, did neurology residency and fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. Sorry, I said this wrong. So she went on to Spelman College and went on to receive her medical degree at Temple University, and from there went on to do her neurology residency and fellowship, as well as her internal medicine residency at the Mayo Clinic. She transitioned to the Mayo Clinic in Arizona in 2008, where she serves as the outpatient practice chair, medical director for the Office of Access Management, and is the co-chair of the CNS disease group for the Mayo Clinic Enterprise Cancer Center. She's also the medical director of the undergraduate Plummer Scholars Program, which is an early undergraduate medical pathway program for Mayo Clinic, Alyx School of Medicine and Science students. She's also served as the vice chair for the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. And there she developed and enjoyed teaching the Cultural Humility and Cross-Cultural Communication program. Her research interests include ensuring that patients with brain cancers have the best quality of life as possible. And she's been a primary investigator in one of the defining studies for the utility of psychostimulants to improve quality of life, as well as thinking and memory in patients with underlying glioblastoma, which is one of the most aggressive forms of brain cancer. She's also the co-author of a book called Navigating Life with a Brain Tumor, which is a resource for patients and families. However, her work goes beyond the clinical realm, and this is how I got to know her. She and her husband, Dr. Gregory Umphrey, founded a national nonprofit in 2019 called Elevate Med. Elevate Med is committed to elevating the field of medicine by providing financial support, mentorship, and leadership training to future physicians from racial and ethnic backgrounds that are underrepresented in medicine. And to date, Elevate Med has awarded over $1 million in scholarships and support to these students. Again, on a more personal level, I got to be a mentor in this program, and I have to say it's been an honor to participate in such an amazing program, and it's an amazing endeavor. Dr. Porter has won many awards, including in 2020, she was the recipient of the Dean's Award for Diversity and Inclusion at the Mayo Clinic Alyx School of Medicine, the Ann B. Young Diversity Scholar Award from the Massachusetts General Hospital for her work in equity and inclusion. She's been noted to be a top provider by the Mayo Clinic in terms of patient experience for the last several years and has won the Castle and Connolly Exceptional Women in Medicine Award. She was recently recognized as the 2023 Alumni Emerging Leader from the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University. And again, it is my exceptional pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Porter, who is going to talk to you today.
Oh, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Dr. Torres, for that warm introduction. It really is just a privilege. I look forward to starting a conversation today about opportunities we have to really bolster the workforce and the components that make up a successful pathway. As you heard, in the introduction, I am joining you from Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm an associate professor of neurology. My office is in the 3rd floor of this building that sits atop a proton beam radiation center, which is a differentiator for us in the Southwest and how we treat and aim to cure cancers. If you don't know much about Mayo Clinic in Arizona, we have a 403-bed hospital, and our itty-bitty hospital is the top transplant center in the entire country, which is always remarkable when I consider that fact. But it's such a thrill to be able to be with you this afternoon and share my learnings about something that's really been critical to the success of my career, and that's pathway programs. And so over the next few minutes, we'll start by laying the foundation by understanding where we are now, related to the current state of diversity in medicine. And then I'm going to give you 2 tangible examples of programs that I have developed. One in the undergraduate space, as you heard from Dr. Torres, called the Undergraduate Plumber Scholars Program. And then in the graduate space, which is Elevate Med, which is geared towards medical students. And so we'll talk about those programs, the components of those programs, and ultimately conclude by identifying what the key components of successful programming looks like. I am on the executive board of the American Brain Foundation. That's a non-compensated role. I am the board chair and founder of Elevate Med, and have never had more fun volunteering for anything in my entire life. So let's get started. And I really wanted to take a step back and talk about what it looks like to have a successful pathway. And I'll tell you that my career thus far is the result of a successful pipeline program. And I'm going to say pipeline just this one time, very intentionally, as we set the stage for the remainder of our time together. And so historically, when we've considered certain career tracks or pathways, we think about the path to get to an intended destination. And so we've developed programs with that idea in mind to describe each step along the way that's needed in order to achieve success. But we also know that when we're talking about pipelines, they can be fraught with barriers, and pipelines have lots of leaks. And it's all too often that there are bright and talented young people. Some of you might be joining us this afternoon. That's all too often that young and talented, bright young people, they seek with all of the energy, they seek these wonderful careers, and some barriers occur along the way. And they start to deviate from the track that has been laid out for them. And so when we know better, we do better. And so we're looking to get rid of these leaks. And so we're going to talk more about pathway programs as opposed to pipelines. And that's intentional for a few reasons. One, there's been a tragic history in the United States with pipeline in our Indigenous and Native communities. The school to prison pipeline that communities of color have become all too familiar with. And as we shift our thought from leaky pipelines to pathways, we recognize there's more than one way to get to an intended destination. And that's what I hope to continue to reinforce throughout our discussion. And so you're also going to hear me use terms like diverse or people of color or underrepresented in medicine as opposed to the term minority. And this also is intentional because there's nothing minor about entire non-white populations who have contributed so very deeply to this country. And we know that our words have power. And so before we get too far into the data, I thought that as we think about pathways and mentorship and all of the different influences that happen along the way, I would ascribe that there are some mentors that are tangible. They're real people. They're the folks that you can knock on the door that are a couple offices down, or the person you can pick up the phone or send a text message. But there are also those informal mentors. Some of them might be fictional, but they're the ones that start to create an idea for you, a vision of what could be possible in your own career time. And so as I reflected back about my own experience with mentorship, I'll share that my very first mentor, and if some of you are young on this line, on this call, you may not recognize the picture that I have listed under 1984. But I'll tell you, this is a famous family, TV family, the Huxtables. And I would look forward to every Thursday night because on Thursday nights, I would see a family on TV that looked a little bit like mine. But more importantly, as we're thinking about mentorship and envisioning what is possible for our own careers, that was my first image of a Black physician. And so Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable was an obstetrician, and I would see him go to the hospital and talk with patients, and I just thought that was incredible. And so from a very early age, that image of a Black physician, a successful family became imprinted in my mind of what's possible. possible. And so I encourage all of you to really take inventory about those images that were shown to you very early in life and how that might have impacted or influenced how you wanted to move forward in your career. Because all of that imagery, that representation, it's incredibly important. And I hope that you'll understand that representation absolutely matters as we start to grow in our careers, as we start to look for what might be next. And so that's why it's so important when we start talking about not just elements of diversity, but also diversity and inclusion. So Dr. Huxtable was a fictional mentor, a fictional character, but the picture under 1990 is one that some of you may recognize. So Dr. Ben Carson came to international acclaim in the late 90s, or late 80s, pardon me, for having separated twins conjoined at the brain. And he wrote a book that came out shortly thereafter called The Gifted Hands. And that was my first introduction to neuroscience. And in fact, as I read the pages of his book, I saw myself as a person whose curiosity really exceeded their immediate circumstance. And that was my first introduction to the neurosciences. And in fact, after reading this book and learning more about Dr. Carson, I thought I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And in fact, I didn't even know that neurologists existed until I went to medical school later. When I think about, so there's an example of a fictional mentor, a real life mentor, neither of whom I could ever pick up a phone and call. I will tell you, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Carson and got his autograph. He had written another book called Think Big. And last year, we were able to exchange some discussion about Elevate Med and the work that we're doing in that space. And so that was a wonderful full circle moment for me. So you never know when some of your intangible mentors actually become more tangible. But all of these points, I hope that what you'll start to see, all of these touch points, all of these pieces along my life, along my career, started planting seeds for where I am today. I went to high school right down the street, about 2 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. And I learned how to drive on this property that is now Mayo Clinic in Arizona. During the summer of high school, I was never the kid that was allowed to stay at home and, I don't know, play video games or talk on the phone. My dad felt very strongly about education. And so he found a program for me. It was a math and science honors program. And each summer for 6 weeks, I would live on the ASU, Arizona State University campus, and take classes in math and science. And this was a program that was designated for students that were sort of underrepresented in STEM fields. And as I think back, those were the first introductions for coming together with other students with similar aspirations and not necessarily being in a position where I was the one or the only. There's something empowering about being joined and learning in an environment with other people who have such similar interests as you. And that helped me know that at a very young age, even though I hadn't seen it yet in real life, I absolutely could do it. As you heard in the introduction, when I did my undergraduate at Spelman College, I was an English major, biochemistry minor. And this was the first time in my life that I really got to shed all of sort of those external features that, oh, Alyx, you're only having these sorts of successes because you're Black, or, oh, it's because you're a woman. Spelman College is a historically Black liberal arts college for women. And so this was the first time that I got to just be Alyx and figure out what it was that I wanted to contribute to society and who in the world I wanted to be and how I wanted to give back. And ultimately, that's what led to me going to medical school at Temple University. I'll tell you, at Temple, I had my first introduction to a pathway program at Mayo Clinic. And that's where I started to have some understanding of the different specialties. And when I realized that I was not indeed destined to be a neurosurgeon, because Ben Carson didn't tell me in his book that neurosurgeons use microscopes to operate. And I became very motion sick the first time I needed to do that. ultimately, it was through this pathway program that I was able to shadow a neurologist, and I fell in love with the beauty and the intricacy of the neuro exam, and being able to look at the imaging and correlate that with what I was learning through taking a detailed history and examining the patient. And so when I was at Temple, I came back from this pathway program at Mayo. I went back to my to one of my mentors at Temple. I said, I found it. I want to be a neurologist. And they said, well, that's great, Alyx, but you really don't look like a neurologist. And I made a joke, as most of us do when people say things that are less than smart. And I said, well, let me grab my bow tie and I'm going to make everybody feel a lot more comfortable about this decision. But the truth is, and I'll show you the data in just a moment, if I didn't look like a neurologist, it was incumbent upon me to make sure that I was the very best that I could be. And at the time, the program at Mayo Clinic in Rochester was rated the #1 residency or #1 training program for neurologists in the country, and I decided that's where I needed to be. So just in those few examples, I hope that you'll start to understand that our influences, our images, the aspirations that we set for ourselves, they really come from all directions. And when we think critically about what a pathway program really is, it can almost turn into a life's work. It's a constant repeated exposure to what's possible, cultivating and really not just exposing, but creating some education and then ultimately empowering the folks that are engaged. So that way we can all feel like we're ready to make that next step. So as I shared when I was at Temple, in medical school, I had the opportunity to do a pathway program at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This is my cohort at the time, so we were all first-year medical students. And this is me at my residency graduation from Mayo Clinic within the Department of Neurology. I'll tell you, within our group, we had another person that decided to go into neurology. We had a couple neuro adjacent, so she went into PM&R, she went into obstetrics, he went into cardiology, and she went into psychiatry. And so it's critically important that when we think about these pathways, recognizing that there's not just one destination. This program that I attended when I was a medical student really was meant to just expose people to the various specialties. And I really couldn't be more pleased to still be in contact with this cohort of like-minded individuals that we were connected with at such an early age, because we recognize the importance of the network. And so when we think about why pathway programs, why having mentorship, why having the importance of representation plays such a critical role as we really seek to develop a workforce that reflects the population that we care for every day. It's important to understand where we're coming from in terms of the statistics. And so what I'm going to share with you in this section are data that come from the AAMC. They do a diversity in medicine report it has ranged from every 3 to 4 years, and now we're coming close to 5. I anticipate learning more in 2024. And so it's important that first, before we talk about the workforce at large, really critical that we start to think about academics, because academic faculty are who really help us shape our future. So at the end of 2019, when they looked at the cross-section of academic faculty across the US, this was the representation of faculty members, professors. This is the number of students, the breakdown of the number of students that were entering medical school in 2019. And so we have some work to do because as we talk about representation, what you might see for yourself in the future, really important to recognize that you can see yourself in your professors, that you can see yourself amongst your classmates. And that helps us determine sort of how we want to spend our careers. Do we see ourselves teaching in a classroom? Do we see ourselves being in a particular specialty? And so really important that we have some baseline understanding of this breakdown from a racial and ethnic representation perspective. As we transition from looking at race and ethnicity and focus a bit on gender, in these AAMC graphs, women are reflected in purple and men are in teal. And so very slowly over time, the proportion of full-time women faculty has increased. If we look back, in 1967, 7% of medical school acceptances were women, compared to 51% in 2019. So it takes some time. Nearly 50 years later, we're finally reaching some parity in terms of the number of medical school acceptances. In less than 50 years, we'll see parity in terms of what the actual workforce looks like. And so that's very exciting. When we take a step broader, though, from looking at the what's happening in academics and look at the workforce as a whole, this is why certain groups are referred to as underrepresented in medicine. So when we look at the US Census population on the right, in comparison to the number of physicians in the workforce on the left, there are certain groups that are less represented than what the population would reflect. And so that's why Latino, Black, Native groups are considered underrepresented compared to the US population. So orienting you to this graph, female is in purple, and as in the other AAMC graphs, and males are represented in teal. And so when we look at racial and ethnic breakdown by gender, ideal state would be seeing equal representation across the board. What starts to raise some concern about this graph is the limited number of Black men in medicine, which actually could be an entire lecture topic on its own. And so one of the issues that we see is that the number of Black men currently applying to medical school is no different than the number in 1970. And so that's why there's so many different efforts, whether it be Black men in white coats or Diversify Medicine, to name a few, that are really trying to raise awareness and educate and balance the imagery that's out there regarding negative stereotypes of Black men, and really expanding the dialogue among Black boys, because we know it starts early, and there's so many other ways to be successful and have influence as in your career without being a baller or a performer. And so there's been data that's been published in both the scientific and the lay literature that suggests that both racial and ethnic, as well as gender diversity, can influence health outcomes. And this isn't because we are not capable for caring for people that look different than us. I would argue that many of us do this every single day without issue. But we also recognize that there's a much more rapid establishment of trust and understanding, and that is positively impacts the partnership in medical care and beyond between the patient and the physician. Because when there's increased trust and folks feel as though they belong in the healthcare setting at a time when they're really at their most vulnerable, we know there's a higher likelihood of adherence to treatment, and that ultimately is going to impact health outcomes. And I believe we all have a moral obligation to put an end to health disparities. And so bolstering the workforce is one of those tangible things that we can do that will make a difference. And we know that this matters. It will impact our patients. It will make a difference in how our medical students are educated. And certainly it influences our colleagues. When I think about the questions that are left unanswered or the populations that are left unstudied, it really does influence the science and our understanding of the spectrum of disease and how different populations are impacted. And so I would argue that physician workforce diversity matters in all slices of healthcare and medical education, and it's something that we should all care deeply about. I want to take just a moment and talk about diversity among specialists. In this AAMC graph, primary care is teal, and non-primary care or specialty care is purple. And race and ethnicity is listed along the y-axis. And so while about 30 to 40% of physicians go into primary care across subgroups, I'd like to draw your attention to the white group, which has the lowest percentage of people going into primary care. And there's some complexities as to why white students are much more likely to specialize than other groups. Some of it might be related to undergraduate indebtedness, and for others, maybe they want to do shorter residency so they can get out and get into the workforce. Some of it has to do with length of residency programs, primary care loan availability. There may be an element of bias. Again, representation comes into play. And so we know that people are much more likely to be drawn to certain areas where they see others that look like them. And so ultimately, this is what leads to severe underrepresentation in specialties like ours in neurology. And it gets even more extreme when we look at specialties or subspecialties of neurology, like mine in neuro-oncology. And so looking at this diversity graph again from the AAMC, at the end of 2018, out of approximately 13,000 neurologists, only about 3,000 identified as women. And so that's about 26%. That means that most patients may not see a woman neurologist. And if we break that down further, 8% of neurologists in this country come from backgrounds that are underrepresented in medicine. So I'm included in this 1% of neurologists that are Black. Less than 0.1% of neurologists identify as Native or Indigenous. To date, it's my understanding there are 5 Black women that practice neuro-oncology in the United States. And so we have to think about what that means for our patients, what that means for our learners and trainees, our colleagues. And so it's critically important that we continue to bolster our workforce because we know these careers are challenging. But when you're coming from backgrounds that are underrepresented in medicine, there are some unique challenges that are also faced that we have to be prepared for. No one got to where they are easily. And so there are hurdles along the way that each of us have faced. Some hurdles and some barriers and challenges are shared. Some are unique and maybe worth addressing. So the first one that I wanted to speak to a bit is funding shortages. So we know when we've looked at data that comes out of the NINDS or NIH, women and folks from underrepresented backgrounds are tend to be underfunded. And so when we think about what that means, as I referred to before, about the unanswered questions that have come up in our limited understanding of the spectrum of disease and how different populations are impacted, that's something that we have to consider. We know that folks that are coming from underrepresented backgrounds often have responsibilities that extend beyond their immediate households. And so that's something else. And that women and people of color unfortunately, still are paid less than their white male counterparts, even within the specialty of neurology. And so these additional responsibilities are something that also have to be taken into consideration for groups that identify as underrepresented. There's also something known as the diversity tax. And basically, for anyone who's less familiar, this is an assumption that based on your particular background, whatever element of diversity you may represent, that you automatically want to do research in and have an interest in or want to speak about diversity-related issues, and that you are the expert. And so, unfortunately, that then requires you to become the representative, speaking for an entire culture about issues that you may not be prepared for. The underrepresented person often gets asked to be on various committees because they need a diversity representative. They often are put on search committees. This person on their own typically does other things outside of their work schedule to mentor young people from their own institution or others. They're the ones that might be the more interested in staffing underserved clinics or teach about issues related to diversity. And all of these things take time and effort and are extremely important. But until the last few years, none of these initiatives or efforts often were considered as part of the criteria for promotion, and none of them really led to any improvements in income. And because of only having so many hours in a day and so much energy to be able to allocate, often all of these additional tasks or taxes end up leading to burnout. And so important to be aware of that. Oftentimes, underrepresented folks can feel some challenges with lacking concordant mentorship, folks who look like them, doing what they aspire to do. They may not have the breadth and depth of the network that's required. And so having the sponsorship to help you get to the next level and those role models becomes very, very important, but also challenging. And when those things don't exist, and you take all of this really into account, that can lead to a sense of social as well as professional isolation. And we know that there are biases that occur at every level. Some of them are quite obvious, some are less so. And it's not that long ago, and many of you may have seen this letter before. This is dated 1959, in case it's not coming through well in your on your display. But it's not that long ago that medical schools within the United States were actively participating in racist practices. And so this is a rejection letter for a student who was applying to Emory University in 1959, who was not allowed to be admitted because of his Blackness. I will share with you that he ended up going to medical school in California and became a physician. But when we think about exposure to family members who are physicians and having parents or grandparents even that were physicians, if there is a Black physician that's over the age of, I would say, 60, they were probably educated at a handful of medical schools across the country because of some of the historical exclusion that was happening here. And so these are some of the reasons when we talk about some of the unique burdens that are associated with underrepresentation, as well as historical exclusion, limitations in representation, inadequate mentorship, isolation, attrition. All of these things are why it's critically important that we start to invest in the pathway and invest in bolstering the talent pool that we hope one day will enter that workforce to care for all of us. So as we start to shift into talking about a couple of examples, one undergraduate, one medical school, a couple of examples of pathway programs, I want to share just a little bit about Mayo Clinic. And so for anyone who is not familiar, these are the Mayo brothers, and this is their father. And in 1883, there was a horrific tornado that went through southeastern Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota, to be specific, and it left just devastation behind. And so there were some sisters of St. Francis, some nuns who built kind of this clinic to try to care for all who were injured as part of that tornado. And Sister Alfred made a handshake agreement with the Mayo father that if she was able to provide the infrastructure, he and his surgeon sons would provide the medical care for the patients who needed their help. And that was the beginning of the Mayo Clinic. So the mission of Mayo, or if you hear our, I'll call it a mantra, is really the needs of the patient come first. And Mayo was one of the first examples. We're a non-for-profit organization, but one of the first examples where they would just care for the patients who needed care, regardless of their station, regardless of their status. Of course, healthcare has changed over the last 100 years. Yet and still, it's still such a privilege to be part of the first and largest multi-specialty integrated not-for-profit medical practice in the United States. And so we have three main what's called destination medical centers: Arizona, Florida, Minnesota. And we have a medical school that is rated at this time number 13 in the country. And so when we look at our medical school, we have campuses in Minnesota, Florida, and Arizona, and you can see the breakdown of the number of students that are at each. Our class sizes are very small, and so it's extremely competitive. But within that level of competition, what I hope to draw your attention to is this number here. So it's remarkable. If anything, on this slide, there's so much information on this slide that's worth talking about. But the one I want to focus on is the fact that 24% of the students represented within Mayo Clinic Alyx School of Medicine identify as underrepresented. So it's critically important if we're going to walk the walk and talk the talk and are earnest about really supporting that next generation of physicians and creating a workforce that looks like the population. we have to be earnest in who it is that we're looking to educate. And so I will share a little bit about the undergraduate plumber scholars program, because we didn't get to that number just by accident. But it's critically important that we look at some of those components that have made this program so successful. And so Dr. Plummer was known as a diversified genius. He was the first person to really come up with this idea of an integrated medical record, putting all of the different specialists and specialties together on behalf of one patient, understanding that the real strength is the diverse perspectives that each of the specialists bring. And so, as we were developing this particular program, there was no finer name than to name after Dr. Henry Plummer. And so, our program is really meant for rising sophomores to help level the playing field, because we recognize that undergrads across the country are coming with different levels of relationship, perhaps, with their pre-health advisors. They're coming with different levels of knowledge and understanding of what is required to even get into medical school. And we know that we want to try to sort of unveil the idea of this hidden curriculum, so that it becomes more of a level playing field, so that everybody knows what's required. And once you know what's required, then you can get started and really compete. And so this was always developed to be a two-component program. So the first part is 9 months distance learning. We were using Zoom before everything was on Zoom. And so we have quarterly interactive webinars. And so the first is really just understanding what is the pathway to medical school? What does a career in medicine really require from undergrad throughout to being more senior in your career. The second webinar, we talk about how to best use your time in the summer. Many of these students have to work to either support themselves, help with their families. And so we do highlight programs, including our own at Mayo Clinic, that can help give stipends for their time, but also really help them build their skill set and build in their experiences as they look to meet their goals and move ahead to medical school matriculation. We have partnered with Princeton Review, and we're first in this webinar gives sort of a 30,000-foot view of what's required for the MCAT, including the cost. Many students are shocked by how much it costs even just to apply to medical school. So we try to break that down a little bit more. And then the students get to hear from our admissions, folks in our admissions office, and get more details about what the application process looks like. So for everyone that participates in the 9-month distance learning program, they get to then compete with one another to participate for our summer program. And so those students, and you see some of them pictured here, are all brought to, in this picture, this is in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we have the opportunity to set them up with Mayo Clinic, Alyx School of Medicine mentors. It's critically important to have near-peer mentorship. And so sometimes undergrads will say, "Oh, Dr. Porter, will you mentor me?" And I'm always available and happy to answer questions. But the truth is, I went to medical school 25 years ago. They don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from students who are at that immediate next step. And so really pairing them with a real life medical student, for many of them, it's the first time they've ever talked to anyone who has achieved what they're looking to achieve. And so that's something that's critically important in our experience with undergrads. We also arrange for them to have physician shadowing that really exposes them to the various specialties. We provide them with materials from Princeton Review, and have some of the Princeton Review tutors start doing some smaller sessions with the students while they're here. We have them come to our program with a draft of their personal statement, and our admissions committee reviews that draft and really gives them some constructive criticism, in addition to having some of our folks from medical humanities work with them about creative writing. And one of the things that I'll tell you is probably one of the most important components. Once they arrive on our campus, we give them a journal and ask them to really capture their experience, whether it's what they've seen or observed in shadowing, or how they connected with some of their with their mentor, or with some of the friends that they've met. as part of the program, and using what they've learned or what their reflections have become to help inform their personal statements has been really one of the most helpful things for the students that we get feedback on. And then we take them through mock interviews. We have some clinical simulations and discussion panels while they're here as part of the program. So UPS is the bigger 9-month-long webinar-based portion of the program. UPS Plus is when we bring them to the summer for the summer, and then UPS Plus Virtual Extension allows us to still reach more students by having 1-hour-long weekly show and tell with different specialists, different specialties. You know, it's really hard to know that one day you want to be a dermatopathologist if you've never even heard that word before, right? So this is our way of exposing students to all the different, really the diversity of what medicine has to offer. And so the program has been happening for, we launched in the 2018-2019 academic year, and have had success to date. Some of these students who are listed here are matriculating through medical school. We'll have our first graduates next year, which is really exciting. This is the breakdown of our current cohort, and I hope that you'll see the number of undergraduate schools that are represented, the backgrounds of the students that are represented. Many of them are first generation. The HBCUs that we've partnered with who now have students that are part of our program. And I put an asterisk here because it had taken some time, but through time, collection of data, we were able to apply for a grant. And so what was funded initially by the medical school now is grant supported. And we're able to expand the program across all 3 of the Mayo destinations, which ends up being critically important to help us grow and to help us continue to really expose, educate, and engage with more students. So that's an example of work from an undergraduate perspective. Now I'll shift and talk a little bit about what we've done with Elevate Med for medical students. And so, as you heard in the introduction, Elevate Med is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit that my husband and I founded in 2019, really with 3 goals in mind: to prioritize physician workforce diversity, to close the gap of financial inequity in medical education, and really to empower the next generation of physician leaders. And so, unfortunately, the cost of medical education has just exponentially increased. And so now what we're seeing is that receiving a medical education in many ways has become a privilege of the wealthy, with 60% of medical school students now coming from families with incomes in the top 20th percentile. And so that's something that we recognize when we look at why bright students are no longer choosing to go into careers in medicine. The cost is the #1 reason, and that's something that we really wanted to influence. We're governed by a board of directors that comes from across the country. And in addition to scholarship support that we provide for the students, we do provide them with mentors. So rather than the near peer mentorship model that we have demonstrated with our undergraduate program, with these mentors, we find physicians in the specialty areas where these students believe they wish to have careers. And so it's empowering for 3rd and 4th year medical students. You know, if you have a 3rd year who says, I want to be a cardiologist, there's nothing more beautiful than being able to pair them with a mid-career cardiologist to help them see what their life could look like, 10 years later, 15 years later. Physicians are leaders in whatever spaces they hold. And so leadership development is another critical tenet of our program, as is personal, really, and healthcare finance wellness and finance education. We know that students from underrepresented backgrounds have higher levels of indebtedness when they're coming from undergrad, higher levels of indebtedness when they're coming through medical school, get paid less, and have other responsibilities. And so having some understanding as to how to deal with that debt and understanding even how healthcare finance works, so that in the jobs that they sign on the dotted line for, they are more empowered than just being at the mercy of saying, okay, I trust what it is that I'm jumping into. So those are all of the components of the programming that we offer. And so here I've included, and I'm watching the time, but I've included our mission and vision. You can learn more at elevatemed.org or follow us on any of the social channels. But as I showed you at the beginning of this talk, the reason why we exist is because there's a problem that we're looking to solve. And only 9% of physicians identify with these groups. And so that's why we've chosen to make such a significant investment in these populations. So to date, we've awarded over $1 million in scholarships and support to 50 medical students from across the country. Every school or that's listed on this map is who we've partnered with and who we've had been able to honor scholarships at those schools. And these are the 50 students. When I share this slide at our fundraisers, I say this is what $1 million investment looks like, and I really couldn't be more proud. I was sharing with Dr. Torres earlier. So far, we've only turned one into a neurologist. She's in residency right now at UCLA, neurology residency. I take that back. Two neurologists thus far. So we really are looking to help our students get that top number one match spot that they're looking for, and provide them with the tools needed to be successful. So as we think about some of the components of a successful pathway program, you have to be enthusiastic. You have to really believe that this work is worth doing because it's a long game that we're playing. When we talk about the amount of investment that we're making in undergrads, we're not going to see that return on investment for 10 or 15 years from now, especially since more and more students aren't going directly from undergrad to medical school. As we talk about investments, you have to have funding. So initially, our undergraduate program was funded by our medical school. Now we've been able to get external grant support. That funding is critically important. With Elevate Med, we are funded by private donors. So folks like myself who understand this story all too well and believe in the mission and the vision of what we're doing. And so having that funding is critically important to make any pathway program successful. You have to have the talent pool. And so it does require being specific about who you're looking to influence, what you're looking to really teach them, show them, and then build your program around that. So as you could see in the examples that I shared, what an undergraduate student needs is very different than what a third or fourth year medical student needs. And now that with Elevate Med, we've begun to have graduates, folks that are in their residency now, we continue to keep close contact with them. What they need is a little bit different than what they needed when they were in medical school. For all of these programs, it requires a good amount of volunteerism. And so it takes some commitment of volunteers. And usually those volunteers are the mentors. And so whether it be medical school mentors or junior faculty or mid-career faculty, even senior faculty mentors, you have to have that commitment and be clear about what the expectations are on both sides. Because a really beautiful mentorship relationship should absolutely be bi-directional, where both parties are receiving something from it and are committed to it. And so having that commitment is critically important. You have to be able to track what's happening to the students that are engaged in the pathway. So whether it's undergraduate, and with our undergrad program, we send surveys out once a year to find out, what are you doing now? Have you applied to medical school? Have you gotten into medical school? How's it going in medical school? Because not only do we want to get them there, we want to keep them there and want them to graduate. So this is a constant assessment, a constant tracking. Same is true with our students in Elevate Med. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you have to have enthusiasm because this work really takes patience. The payoff is years. And the wins, the successes are small. It's the great email that you get because somebody had an awesome interview and they nailed it and they were so grateful for their mentor. Or it's the student that you meet that was inspired by another Elevate Med scholar who encouraged them to apply. So those are the little wins along the way. The big wins are when you get that note, I got into medical school, or I got my first choice residency program. Those are the big wins. But again, it circles back to funding and patience. You have to be able to track the students to be able to continue, because these programs get expensive, to continue to fund it so that you can start to see the impact of all of the investment. And so I take you back to how we started this talk. Oops, pardon me. In terms of all of the components of a successful pathway program. And when I think back on my career over the last 20 years, at every step along the way, there's been a bit of a pathway, and mentorship has been critical to my success. 2008 was when I came to Mayo Clinic in Arizona. 2011 is when I co-authored the book Navigating Life with a Brain Tumor. And here's a plug for AAN programs. I was part of the Palatucci leadership program and was paired with a mentor, Dr. Lynn Taylor. She ultimately, in my desire to advocate for patients with and their family members who are dealing with brain cancer, she and I had the opportunity through the AAN and Oxford University Press to co-author this book. That mentorship, having a more senior neuro-oncologist and work together when I was very junior in my career on this work is one of the greatest successes of my career thus far. But it was only happened because of mentorship, and only happened because of the pathway, the leadership pathway program called the Palatucci Leadership Forum. So think of that. I have another asterisk down here in 2018 because that was also the year that I participated in the AAN Diversity Leadership Program. And so it's critically important, each of these steps along the way to really have that, I'm going to call it a breeding ground for talent to come together to learn some skills and then to springboard into the next thing. I was a founding member of Women in Neuro-Oncology, which is a subcommittee within the Society for Neuro-Oncology, and that's then morphed into the Women in Diversity subcommittee, connecting people with one another, creating mentorship opportunities, really is what leads to folks getting promoted in their careers, continuing to develop sponsors across institutions. It's really been beautiful. I shared a lot about Elevate Med, and now in the leadership roles that I hold at Mayo and within the American Brain Foundation, we'll see what's next. But I hope that you'll recognize that each of us are experiencing a particular pathway. Think back in what's been so influential for you in your career thus far, and think about where there's gaps. Because my daughter is, I have a 15-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, and my daughter's all into, TikTok and all this. And she told me, "Oh, Mom, I want to be an influencer." And so I joke with her about that. But when I think about truly how to have influence, you want to find gaps and fill them. And we'll all be much more successful and have fulfilled careers if, rather than wanting to be an influencer, we turn ourselves into professional gap fillers. So with that, I hope that I've left enough time for questions. And thank you again, Dr. Torres, for the invitation and the opportunity. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Porter, for that. Amazing talk and really inspirational work that you've done, and the change you have affected over your career, and hopefully Elevate Med will continue to grow and continue to do amazing things. We'll open it up to questions. Please place your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll go ahead and ask them for Dr. Porter. Or if you're, if you want, you can just say the question yourself, but I'm happy to if anyone's shy. All right, so Fabiana said, no question, but I truly appreciate what Dr. Porter has been able to accomplish.
Oh, thank you for that. Maybe, Dr. Torres, if it's okay, while we're waiting for folks to stimulate their questions, I might ask you, have you participated in a pathway program or been influenced by mentorship?
No, I've not participated in a specific pathway program, but I have, and been, at the end of the day, we're the product of, the involvement of a lot of people. I don't think anyone has reached any any significant achievement without help along the way, and I think that's one of the things that that have really pushed me to try to do the same for others, right? Because I have benefited greatly from people helping me along the way. I'm the first person in my family to go to college and go to medical school, and no one knew how to help me. No one knew how to do applications even to apply for college. So um, I was lucky enough to have people that saw me and saw something and decided to help. And I think that the only way that things get better is if we all do our part and try to help others along the way. And yeah, so one of my first mentors was my gym teacher in grade school. And she, I grew up in a very poor town with not great schools. And she said, you need to apply to this other place. She actually got me a scholarship to a private high school. And luckily, I was able to sort of improve over time. But, without that initial mentorship, without that initial push, I probably wouldn't be here. And, and that's why I wholeheartedly support the work that you do, because you're changing lives on a regular basis. And I think that if more people did that, medicine would be transformed, and patients would be able to interact with people that look like them and doctors that look like them, and know where they come from, and are better able to understand their position, and so yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that was so well said. And one of the things when we talk about, how we influence patients, it's also how we influence one another, right? So just the folks that you have lunch with when we have the opportunity during a crazy work day to have lunch, or the people who you see in the hallway, or you chat about what you did over the weekend. There's nothing more beautiful than colleagues sharing their own experiences. And then if a patient mentions to you something that you have some familiarity with because your friend celebrates Diwali, or your friend, has a quinceañera that they're planning, and the patient mentions something, then all of a sudden it brings that connection because of your familiarity. And so that's how diversity, even when it's not directly a patient seeing a physician from their same background, just because of proximity to our colleagues, we're able to do a better job by having diverse folks around us. And so it really does make a difference at every single layer. And so I couldn't agree more about all of those folks who planted seeds very early in our careers that have helped us get to this moment. And I often tell residents and fellows, you're going to interact with a lot of people along the way, and really everyone is your teacher. There's something that we can learn from everyone who we come into contact with. Whether you choose to take that on, what you learn, take that on, incorporate it into the way that you do things, or never do what you've seen, it still ends up being critically important.
There's a question. I have another point to make, and that is, for all of you that are early career, or never be afraid to ask someone for mentorship, and never be afraid to ask anyone for help, because I think by and large, you're going to find an overwhelming positive response if you ask someone for help, because we've all been there, we've all been helped, and I don't think anyone is going to push your way or turn your way if you ask them for that mentorship. And sometimes, again, we as mentors don't think to go and ask around, to everyone we know, do you need a mentor? And it's nice when someone actually comes and says, hey, can you help me with this? And so really don't be afraid. Part of that mentorship is two-way street, right? You have the mentors that provide that mentorship, but at the same time, it's nice when someone comes up to us and asks us for that help. One of the questions that just came through is from Fabiana as well. And she said, how do you tackle imposter syndrome?
Yeah, that's a hard one because I'd like to tell you that there aren't moments anymore where I feel woefully inadequate, but it's just not true. I think that it comes up at the funniest times. Sometimes it comes up when I'm in a group full of moms at my kid's school and I don't know how to make whatever craft. Sometimes it comes up when I'm a speaker on the podium of an international meeting. And so I have to remind myself in those moments that I have everything that I need to be here now. And I do my best to push some of those feelings of insecurity down and recognize that I do have something to offer. And I've accepted the fact that there's always going to be somebody in the room that's smarter than me, but nobody knows how to be Alyx Porter better than I do. And so I would encourage you when those moments come up to lean on that because your lived experience has given you some unique opportunities to grow certain skills that only you are able to execute and demonstrate. And so that's some of what helps me along the way. And so, the other piece of it is that I've stopped naming it imposter syndrome because I don't think that it's an illness or anything like that. I think it's part of life. I think that if you have a healthy ego, you should feel a little insecure every now and again. But when it becomes a problem is when it keeps you from being able to move forward. And so I've come to accept that, yeah, sometimes I'm going to feel nervous, but I have everything that I need to move ahead in this moment and hopefully have an impact.
I think that's one of the best answers I've heard for that particular question. And it's totally 100% true. I mean, we have each lived, and gone through certain experiences that color our perspective on every single issue. And no one has lived the exact same life that we have. And therefore, we always have the ability to offer a unique perspective that, should be worthy at least of consideration in any meeting. All right, so I'm probably mispronouncing this, but Xian Yu says, "Hi, it is astonishing to listen to you, Dr. Porter. Thank you. I have a dilemma myself. I'm Korean Mexican, second-year medical student. I want to apply to residency in the U.S., but I don't feel, I don't know in what category I fit in. Most of the time, I feel like an outcast. I'm not considered either fully Korean or fully Mexican. I'm not considered fully Korean, Korea, or considered Mexican, Mexico. How should I identify as a Asian, AS or Latina, and I truly believe that the diversity is key to improving the healthcare system." Sorry, it's very convoluted. I'm having trouble reading today.
I appreciate the question. And one of the things that I think has improved in how we ask people to identify. So I believe, when I was applying for college and medical school, there were like 4 categories. Now, and you had to choose one. Now, what I'm seeing is choose all that apply. And so it sounds like you have the opportunity to, typically what I've seen is, one selection, one category for race, choose all that apply, one category for ethnicity. And so I would mark Hispanic. Usually that's how it's listed as far as the ethnicity, and race Asian. Maybe that's a way to honor both, or maybe you choose multiple. But I think that there's beauty in all that we bring together. And so one of the students in the Elevate Med program is Iranian and Mexican. And so she calls herself a Latina in a hijab. And that's beautiful. And that is part of her secret sauce that makes her so effective and impactful. And so I would encourage you to consider the fact that your background is so beautifully rich as actually a superpower rather than a challenge that you're trying to navigate, because those elements of diversity make you uniquely poised to have influence in circles that we probably haven't even imagined. And so I appreciate you asking the question, but choose all that apply is my answer.
Another amazing answer, I think, because again, I feel like society in many ways tries to box us in or neatly fit us into, boxes. And at the end of the day, again, where each of us is unique. And that uniqueness is what makes us us and what makes us beautiful and what gives us power in a sense. And don't let anyone limit you to a box. You can check all the boxes you want and be everything you want. And that's okay because we only have one life to live. It should not be limited in any way by anyone. Any other questions? So Dr. Porter, as a mentor, what do you think is the best approach, both from the mentor standpoint and the mentee standpoint, in order to create a successful relationship that eventually would lead to progress and hopefully good outcomes?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is figuring out, when you're the mentee, figuring out what it is that you're looking for. Because sometimes if you just approach and say, I'm just looking to be mentored, my response to the person asking me for that is, well, what are you looking to achieve or do? Are you looking to have a research project? Are you looking to prepare a talk? Are you just looking to learn what a day in the life of a neuro-oncologist is? There's different components to mentorship. And so I think that as the mentee, it's critically important that you're clear on what it is that you're looking for. And then there should be some sense of a time frame around it. So as you're having, when I think about, and even when I showed the pathway of my career along the way, there's been different mentors for different things. So that doesn't mean that I couldn't call someone who was a mentor to me in medical school or in residency and ask them a question about whatever. But I wouldn't expect to have the same relationship with someone who mentored me 20 years ago as what I would have with them now. And so being specific about what it is that you're looking for mentorship in and what that timing looks like. And then recognizing that both parties are there to give a little and learn a little. And so if you're asking someone to mentor you, being respectful of their time. Sometimes if you have a meeting, first figure out how you'd like to meet, whether it be by Zoom or phone or email, and then being focused with that. If there are questions that you have, be prepared. Think about that ahead of time. Write some things down. Create a little agenda. Show the mentor that you're taking this seriously and you're respectful of their time. Because again, mentorship is volunteerism. And so we need to show that we're taking that seriously. So have some, be prepared. I think those are some of the things that I would think about from both the mentee and the mentor. And then as a mentor, recognizing that we're not meant to be everything to everyone. And so, um, uh, uh, from a mentorship standpoint, also being focused and sometimes helping the mentee figure out, okay, what is it that we're really looking to achieve? Because sometimes that might be the direction that the mentee actually needs. So I hope that helps give a sense of sort of how I approach it and how I encourage others to approach it. And there's always a little bit of chemistry that happens in any good, strong mentorship relationship. And sometimes that chemistry just isn't there. Or sometimes the time zones get in the way or life gets in the way. And so not being afraid when it's not meeting the needs of either party, not being afraid to say, thank you so much for the time that you've already invested. I hope to reach out at some other time or whatever else. I think that's okay too. But it's really important that both parties are equally invested.
Here's one last question. You've obviously accomplished a ton. And I think there are a lot of people out there with amazing ideas, but there's always this doubt and inertia, et cetera, that prevents these ideas from coming to fruition. How does one tackle that and just get out there and do what they want to do?
Yeah. It's such an important question. And I see it a little in the same way that I see the idea of imposter syndrome. So if you've got a big idea, it should be scary. You should feel like, ugh, I don't know if I could do this. That's how you know it's a great idea. And so you have to feel the fear and do it anyway. And just very quickly, I'll share a quick story. When I decided that we were going to start Elevate Med, even though we launched in 2019, we started almost a whole year before we formally launched. And I was terrified. I knew how to give a medical talk. I didn't know how to give a talk that would inspire people to give and to believe in this idea of this thing that didn't even, didn't exist. Um, And so there were some investments that I had to make in myself. And so recognizing that you come with some strengths yourself, but really surrounding yourself with people that can help you bring this idea to fruition ends up being important. And one of the people that I pulled within my circle is somebody who was good at IT and social media and all of that, because I didn't know how to design a website. And she set everything up, and there was a password she gave me. And I changed the password from what she gave me to the phrase, "This will work," because I needed to encourage myself. Every time I logged into any device, any account, anything I was doing, I reminded myself multiple times a day, "This will work, this will work, this will work." Until one day she was like, "What have you done? I can't get into anything." And I was like, "What do you mean? It's fine on my end." And she's like, "Well, I've been trying and it's locking me out." And so she's like, "Take me through each step of what you're doing." And so then she's like, "What is that password that you just put in?" And I said, "Oh, well, it says this will work." And she's like, "Why did you change it from what I gave you?" And I told her I needed some encouragement because I was feeling some of the doubt. And she's like, "Of course this is going to work. Don't change it again." So, I think that you have to feel the fear and do it anyway. And that's how you know that it's a good idea, and recognize that you're not meant if any one of us had all of the answers, that would make it so easy. You're not meant to come with everything fully fleshed out, but certainly that's where mentorship comes in, your support system with your network, so you can flesh some of these ideas out and have people come alongside you who bring different skills to help you see that idea through.
I have another question. It says, thank you for this wonderful presentation. How do you know from a mentor side if you're doing a good job as a mentor to your mentees?
Um, there's been times with folks that I've mentored along the way where I've just asked them, "Am I giving you what you need? Are you feeling like this has been helpful for you?" So I look for feedback from that mentee. I look for the things that are said and the things that aren't said. So if there's a project or something that I'm working on with a mentee and I'm seeing that things aren't moving along, then I have to take a look in the mirror and say, how could I help differently? Or, where does where is the hiccup kind of occurring in this project? And so it takes some introspection, but I also ask directly for feedback from the person I'm mentoring to find out how is this working, recognizing that life is dynamic. Stuff that sounds like a good idea 6 months ago, sometimes now is not such a great idea because you've learned more or life has changed or something. And so having that open and honest relationship ends up being really important. But ultimately, it'll be the success of your mentee that lets you know that you did a good job. It's not too different than parenting. We don't really know if we're doing it right until the kids are grown, right? So you just have to, cross our fingers and hope for the best. And I don't know, it's the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have done unto you.
Thank you, Dr. Porter. This was obviously an amazing talk. And again, thank you for being an inspiration to all of us. And hopefully you will inspire some of the people that came today to achieve great things and help empower a new generation of people to make changes. So thank you again for everything that you're doing and everything that you've done so far. And obviously your amazing talk.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Have a great night, everyone.